Great. All right. So we should be live. Good morning out there. Hello. My name is Melody Lovelace. I'll be the moderator today for the second session or second day, first session of HLCI, so the Hybrid Live Coding Interfaces workshop. Yesterday we had presentations around cultural algorithms and audiovisual relationships. This morning we're going to start off with live code fantasy. Something that's been really interesting is that we've had these really broad categories, like we always do, right? Like we have these broad categories for each section, but then I really love how everything, once we get into the presentations, we get into these like really niche, if you will, specific microcosms and worlds. And that's something I'm particularly excited about, like, for these next conversations about like fantasy. And so with that, let's get into our first presentation. We have Shar Stiles talking about fantasy IDEs. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Melody. Um, I'm going to talk about fantasy IDEs. And here we go. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Shar. I'm currently at the MIT Media Lab in the group called Future Sketches. And this is where I've been doing some research on the future of creative coding. Um, yes, which I'm really excited about. Okay, so before I talk to you about fantasy IDEs, I wanted to show you something that I made in 2017. It was after I had just switched my undergraduate major from fine art to include computer science. And I wrote this manifesto on a laptop that I spent maybe like 17 hours a day on. It was called Charbot. And I'm just going to read you the last line because I think it's still a through point in this kind of work that I do today. So I call for the following to problematize technological determinism while empowering human agency. And so after I graduated school, I was a software engineer, but then like many of you folks, I would do live coding on the weekends and um, like on like after hours. And the particular kind of live coding I would do is GLSL shader code. And I would take it to different places that I I say code really shouldn't have been. So from places like the club or festivals, like the audience members would be like confronted with code in a way that they weren't really like expecting to. And that's kind of like what was really driving my practice for those like years after school. Um, I really think a lot about IDEs and like the different um, platforms that we use. Uh, and I really particularly have been thinking about how IDEs can be more conducive for creative coding. This is just, I guess, if you want to brush up on what IDE stands for, it's just the software that we use to make software. Usually IDEs for creative coding are very made to be very inviting. So this is processing and P5.js. They're both modeled after, well, P5.js is modeled after processing. And the creators are quoted by saying that it was made to be as inviting as possible with a big play button. This is Touch Designer, which I always say it's tricking people into coding because it is coding. You are like, making algorithm. It's just pretending to not be code by being nodes. And or like creative coders and a lot of live coders are using IDEs that were made for enterprise and software engineering for optimization. That's just like the vast majority of IDEs. These are all different IDEs, but they look the same. And so I was thinking, yeah, how could IDEs be more conducive for creative coding? And specifically in my live coding, lens, and I'm thinking about fantasy IDEs. So I made a series of sketches on how different IDEs can be used um, in creative coding. So, or in live coding. This is just like I made these mouse experiments. This is not related. This is just like I wanted to start thinking about like something that's kind of evokes play and is not really like supposed to be like useful in any kind of way. So if if it evokes joy and play, that's the extent in which it's useful. So I made a bunch of these experiments just to start off with. The first one I did is I call it the IDE that always compiles. And basically what it is if your IDE doesn't compile for more than a second, I mean, if your code doesn't compile for more than a second, it'll just automatically send it to an LLM and then it'll compile it for you and replace. And will replace the code in the text in real time. And it kind of creates this like adversarial relationship um, where you're like coding and trying to get it at an idea, and then it kind of like switches it around for you and like just you kind of veers you off in a different direction. It's not very like a helpful AI is a lot of times, when we think about AIs and agents, they're either like collaborators or like helpful things. But in this IDE, it was kind of like, yeah, it was kind of like a problem. But but these were some sketches that I ended up with um, during that process. Another live coding environment I made was this one where I could code multiple shaders because they're in multiple windows. And then I also used this to also do audio because you can just I just did Sonic Pi in the back and then I would have this layered on top. And so it was this kind of like all-in-one environment. And then it also had a chatbot inside of it because I was thinking about like AI and live coding, and there's like a lot of thoughts around live coding and is it a live coding if you're using an AI? But I was thinking like a good place AI could fit is to explain to the audience what's happening. So there's a QR code that audience member could scan, and then they could ask questions about like what's happening in this code and what track list is playing. Okay, I'll stop showing this video. Another experiment I made was thinking about how in live coding and creative coding, source control is different than when you're doing it as an engineer because you're not like sometimes you're not really like building upon something and making it better. You're more like exploring an area. So I took the idea from this Chronos projector by Alvaro Casanelli, where you're able to use a soft interface to push through to scrub through a video, to go through a video through time. And I thought about doing that with source control instead. So your mouse, given a soft mouse where you can push your code through time, you can get different versions of the code that you wrote by just pushing it. This is like some diagrams I tried to make to like explain it. So anyways, yeah, so there's just I still am really like thinking about this question. I'm still working on it. These are just like preliminary experiments, but I'm just really thinking about how we can make the interfaces more playful because a lot of times when we think about innovations in like creative coding or coding in general, we think about the programming language and how that makes us think differently. But I just think that IDE is like an unexplored medium for creativity and using the IDE itself. And like all of the things that I made are like coding language agnostic. And I think that's something that I hope to do in the future. Yeah, so with that, thanks for listening. And hit me up with any questions and ideations about IDEs. Questions.
Great. Oh, oh, thank you for that, Shar. Uh,
Yes.
I really, hmm, yeah, the element of play is really standing out to me right now. And it's like, your smiles and your joy and all of it. And I think it's just interesting because I guess I'm just contrasting it with like another more serious version of a programmer in my
Right.
head right now. And I'm just like wondering, I guess, if you could if you had anything else to add about like the play element, like I know you're still developing ideas, but is there anything like big on your mind for the future right now?
Yeah. I also like I'm sorry I'm like very sick right now. So if I sound like if I'm like talking underwater, that's why. Um, so when yeah, like I think having fun with it for me is really important. Especially because I really care about engaging um people who kind of like maybe like allergic to math, right? Or, the folks who are like I said in the beginning, like I'll do it in like different places where people aren't necessarily expecting for there to be code. So I think having it be playful is really essential to my particular practice. And also like it shows that it doesn't have to be so like difficult, or like so that's also why I teach like my shader workshops. And I think a lot of times when people like, they'll see me like messing up and just having fun with it, it kind of makes it more approachable. And I always say like if I think if Bob Ross was a coder, I think he would be a shader coder because the mistakes in there are really fun and playful. And I think he would fuck with it. I mean, he would be with that. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, thank you for that. Um, well, we're gonna have more time for like a group Q&A at the end. So
Mhm.
Shar will be back later. But we're at the time for our next presenter. But thank you, Shar.
Thank you.
Great. And so next up we have Martin Gius, and they're gonna be talking about ludic live coding.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm just gonna kind of share a bit of my research that I've been doing recently on um, ludic live coding. That means kind of like I'm interested in games and kind of playful approaches to live coding. So I'm literally just gonna share like my kind of mind map that I made with you here. Let's hope there are no more glitches now. Um, so I hope you can see that. Yeah. Um, so this is kind of a mind map I created. And I mean, when thinking about like playfulness in live coding, I think like if you've ever live coded or if you have seen any live coding performance, you would probably agree that playfulness um, is a kind of a course concept in live coding, or it's like inherent, like live coding is inherently playful. At least that's the way I see it. So it's kind of difficult actually to think about this and because there are so many aspects in live coding that could be kind of viewed as playful because there's yeah it's just an engagement within systems. So what I've done is kind of I tried to look at many different kind of live coding systems that people have done and try to pick out ones that for me kind of really symbolize kind of or like really make apparent kind of playful aspects of live coding. And I came up with these kind of three categories that I'm just gonna briefly kind of talk about. And obviously, this is not like exhaustive. I'm sure there are lots of more playful systems, and unfortunately, I also don't really have time to kind of talk about every individual system, even though they are all really great. So if something like catches your eye in the presentation or in the mind map, please just ask me and I will kind of talk a bit more about that later. So let's get started. Here, one category that I kind of identified is like where live coding systems where you have an explicit crossover between video games and live coding. And there are a few examples. For example, like a striking example is Beta Blocker, which is a live coding language by Dave Griffiths that is basically an assembly-like language that you can manipulate in a Nintendo DS, or you can play it with a game controller. It's really nice. It generates fun sounds. Yeah, and I think I'm just gonna move on to the second category I made up which is like, yeah, I mean, this could be kind of said about all live coding languages, that it's a kind of a playing with language, a playing with kind of syntax. But I think there are some striking examples that really like exemplify this. So for example, titles mini notation, where you are able to kind of in a very short kind of way and easy kind of to learn, you're able to manipulate sequences and patterns, and you can kind of nest this and creates this like big complexity. So in these two categories, most of the systems that I found are kind of single player systems. But what is obviously also like extremely interesting now is kind of collaborative live coding, where many people kind of play together. And there's basically like kind of two approaches to it. So one would be kind of using collaborative editors, like Troop or Flock or Estuary. And what's really interesting about this side is that people kind of started using collaborative editors as kind of playgrounds for kind of constrained kind of programming or constrained games in that sense, and which kind of structure the way people interact with each other in the code editor. And then you also have these kind of systems that are kind of they are not editors themselves, but they have a way of collaboration that is part of the game itself. And lastly, I'm just gonna kind of do a bit of self-promotion. Something that kind of came out of this research is a system that I created that is called Cadavre Logiciel, which is basically an implementation of the surrealist game of the Cadavre Exquis, so the Exquisite Corpse, which is this writing game where you write a sentence and then then you fold over the paper and another person continues the sentence, etc., and it's successively folded over. And in my system, there's a kind of a similar mechanic. Everyone can define variables that are then shared with everybody, but the content of the variable is not shared, but can still be used by everyone. So it creates this kind of type of fold and kind of incomplete knowledge among everyone that is kind of collaborating. And yes, this is kind of all I kind of had to say. So I hope it was kind of not too rushed, and I hope you have questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Um, Thank you for that. One question that I have is if you have like any stories related to your project that you just talked about. Like, have you tried this out with like people yet? Have you found any interesting findings?
It's like really recent, so I haven't been able to like really try it out a lot. There was basically like one time, like kind of like play testing that we did, and it's definitely interesting way to kind of collaborate, because here, like usually in collaborative editors or something, you can see everybody and what everybody is doing. And here, the kind of whole thing is that you kind of hide that away from like I don't know what the other players kind of are doing. Um, but you can kind of continuously hear what everybody's kind of contributing. And what's then really interesting, if you define something and somebody else kind of uses it, then you can also change your definition, which will then also influence the sound based on how the other person is doing it. Um, so it creates like a lot of complexities, I would say, which I find quite interesting. And there's a lot of like things going on that are just like emergent. Yeah.
I think that's really exciting. I got like the image almost of battleship. I think, you're talking about games. It's just like,
Hmm.
what is, I know, I mean, they're working in a group, but like, it's almost like, what are they using, or my opponent or my teammate? What's their position?
Yeah, yeah,
That's really fun.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we're gonna go on to our next presenter, who is Friendly Spinach, talking about live coding speculative worlds. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So share my screen. All right. So I'll be talking about live coding speculative worlds. And a few months ago, I started learning uh, how to ray march terrains, also known as terrain marching. And ray marching is an algorithm for rendering photorealistic 3D scenes and, in our case, terrains. And I found that I was often getting more interesting results when I would mess up and get the algorithm wrong, like in this example on the right, versus when I would get the algorithm right, like in this example on the left. And so I sought to see if I could try to systematically find ways to mess up terrain marching. And the way that I went about that was by trying to break down uh, ray marching ray marching trains as a into components or modules, um, and going component by component and messing with them. So for a basic idea of how ray marching works, basically we're trying to calculate how light uh, passes through an object through a position on the screen to some eye and to an eye, or like an origin, like where your eye is. Um, and we do that by uh, basically tracing out a ray from some origin um, through the screen and seeing if it hits an object, in our case, a terrain, or if it doesn't, um, in which case we would, color that point on the screen as either the terrain color or the background color, which is the sky. And so the way that I broke it down is into these components of the ray origin, the ray direction, the ray step size, and also like how the ray moves. So you could kind of see in this uh, animation, the ray kind of just moves in a straight line, but like, what if you made it like a squiggly line that sort of moved in like a sinusoidal pattern, for example? The function describing the object in this animation is just a sphere, but in our case, it's terrain, the light source, the background color, and the object color, the terrain color. And one of the key things that I found was like how powerful iteration was for messing with um, terrain marching. And the basic idea is to have a for loop like in this sort of pseudocode here, and each iteration like slightly mess with the terrain marching process, and throughout all those iterations, um, add up the colors that we get for each of them. So you can see some examples of that in these images. So like it kind of looks like perspectives are like overlaid on top of each other. Um, and so the way that I'm thinking about conceptualizing this is kind of like if train marching as an algorithm is kind of broken up into modules, and if you could think of algorithms as modular systems that can be broken up into modules, maybe iteration is sort of like a meta module that can sort of take other modules as input, and like, because you can, with iteration you can kind of just take any process, iterate it, and during the iterations change it a little bit, um, and it just gets cool results. And so um, I'll go over a few of the ways that I messed with train marching. So one is by messing with the camera position. So like you can see in this animation, like the point where the ray starts, instead of just having one ray origin, having a bunch of them throughout the scene, and sort of adding up those different perspectives. So you kind of looks like you have like these various perspectives kind of overlaid on top of each other. Um, Also like messing with the camera position as a function of the screen position. So you kind of get like a little more uh, wacky and like far from reality with these kinds of things. And then messing with the ray directions, so like how the ray passes through the screen, like maybe rotating it or um, twisting it or something like that. I thought some of these images were cool because it kind of looks like it's like underwater sort of. And one thing that I thought was cool kind of throughout the pieces that made from this was like that it even though it deviates from the way that the train marching algorithm sort of should be, like it still kind of retains this naturalistic um, element and kind of has this like eerie like uncanny sort of feel that like it still sort of feels realistic and naturalistic, at least from my perspective. Even though it sort of deviates from this algorithm for like how you're supposed to make things sort of look realistic, I guess. Also like messing with the sky color. So those are just like oh, and then at some point I kind of got bored of making terrains, so I tried to make like asteroids or like kind of more like outer space kind of things. And so these are some attempts at that. Um, and so those are some short examples. If you want to see, I kind of made like a gallery of a bunch of images at tinyurl .com/spec terrains. I could send that in the chat as well. And if you kind of, I don't really have so much time in this talk to um, really get super into the code and technical details or like how all of the different um, images were made, but if like I'd be happy to sort of talk about that further, either in questions or like if anyone wants to contact me. Um, so for further ideas, I'm thinking maybe creating a generative templating system for messed up train marching that can kind of generate a whole bunch of different shaders in sort of like a generative way, dig further into the idea of algorithms as modular system and as modular systems and identifying meta modules like iteration that, algorithms that can take other algorithms as input and working with that. And I'm, of course, open to collaborations. And so yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Um, yeah, something I wanna is someone in the chat wrote, "This is what shrimps see," as a response to like some of your images, which made me wonder like if you ever create any like stories or narratives to accompany your worlds, or if like what if there's like any element of like yeah, like any narrative or element or imaginative element, other element, when you think of these things.
Yeah, I think like I was sort of by the end I was kind of trying to think of algorithms as stories in a way. Um, and like thinking of like the standard sort of train marching algorithm as like sort of like a typical story arc and um, sort of these like deviations from that as like kind of like nonlinear storytelling or just like messing with storytelling because and like messing with perspective, I guess. And well, yeah, one thing I was thinking about a lot, like in the Top Lab Manifesto, one of the principles are like algorithms are thoughts, and like so like I think that like and like thoughts, stories, like those are kind of similar. And so yeah, I guess like thinking about like the algorithms as stories and sort of how to play with that, I guess. Still a very underdeveloped idea, but yeah.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah, like, it's interesting, it brings up so many things because, yesterday, right, one of our categories was like heritage and cultural algorithms, right? But and for for there, people were talking about like cumbia and algorithmic music and like live coding metal. But here, right, what's interesting, you spent a lot of time talking about like a formula, and then the output um is where like I feel like and then the output is like this world, and I don't know, it's just like a different way of approaching kind of like the same idea. Like people were talking about more like explicit like heritage ideas and incorporate into live coding to create like this story or like a narrative. But yours is like we're from math, and then the result seems to help almost like generate, or yeah, that is that like accurate, or I'm not quite sure. I think I'm just I'm very inspired and excited about what you're all sharing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like thinking about like the algorithms as stories, and like kind of the like actual images is just like cool like artifacts like from those stories, I guess, like, and yeah.
Yeah, and they're all different stories. That's like they can each be like their own kind of story
Yeah,
almost, right?
yeah.
Like the output and then the formula itself, or the algorithm text, however itself. That's so inspiring. I think we're at a point where we can start to invite everyone in, for like our group chat. Um, so if the other presenters can come back for our group Q&A, I was going to take a moment to see if we have any questions for the group. Um, if anyone in this group wants to like start talking about something on their mind, feel free to just start jumping in, but I'm going to look around real quick. Oh, I see. How does, from you have from Kate, how does fantasy come out of mess in live coding? Does anyone want to start?
I like this idea of coming out of mess. I wonder what, like, yeah, maybe it's like it's just another framework.
Hmm. The
Yeah, I
fantasy of
think
mess. Oh, sorry.
no, no, no. I think mess is it's actually, yeah, it's a fun kind of way to see it, I think. Because yeah, like it's usually this way, at least for me, like something unexpected happens, like in live coding, and then you kind of just go with it. And I think this kind of just going with it, this is the I mean, this is the way I would see it. Is kind of this is kind of the fantasy that it creates somehow. So you kind of this kind of turning on the top of its head, like this kind of switch. Okay, like okay, something happened. Okay, we go with it now. This is like the narrative now, you know, and it keeps happening somehow. I think this is. Yeah.
Hmm. All right, the actions become part of like the narrative or story or thing, the world you're building.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it also can just gives you, I feel like it's a way to just give yourself permission to. There's a lot of times, like when you're coding, just because of like the background, you feel like a need to do something or to like be productive, in some way, but just framing it as fantasy gives you permission to reject any kind of um like notions of structure of like defined structure for it.
Mhm. Oh, that's great. Mhm. Did you have anything to add, Yoni, just to check in?
No, no,
All good. Um, you see from Alex, mentioning there's a nice theme here about playing with and bending algorithms and interfaces. I guess the question is, what other assumptions, traditions, and creative coding needs bending? Shar, you talked a little bit about some.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Imagine a keyboard, but it's a sphere. Who knew? Like I'm thinking about, yeah, like what if it could be like that? Actually, the first time I've ever saw someone live coding, I think that this is just something that I like always strive to. You know, it's like when you see something when you're young, you always strive to be like that. Even, you know, but whether, you know, how impactful it was to others, but for you, it was like maybe the coolest thing ever. The first time I ever saw someone live coding was at Baby Castles, and it was someone who was had a keyboard on their neck, and then they were just like using the keyboard like a rock star. Like, you know, they were literally typing like that. So I've been thinking about like hardware, and I think that it's just I'm not very like well versed in making hardware things, so um it's just something I dream about a lot. And I think live coding, we see a lot of folks playing with like the hardware and the interfaces and the actual physical um like uh place where we, you know, how we touch the computer and bending that. I'd love to see more of that.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think for me, like as kind of like being primarily into visuals, like I think like a fairly mainstream assumption is like that like visuals kind of have to like follow music or that like have to like sync to music, and like I think like visuals kind of like um can just sort of like be their own like pattern and rhythm, and like I think maybe like seeing like visuals and music as like polyrhythmic, I guess, and just like has like equal like rhythms, I guess. Like yeah, just just in terms of like I think assumptions that can be sort of and like also just going outside of like just like visuals and music and like other types of mediums. Like just yeah, in terms of like assumptions that I think can be sort of bent and swayed a little.
Mm.
Yeah, and maybe just like kind of very generally, I think there's something just to be said about like assumptions about computation in general. Like you like I think there is a type of computation that doesn't need computers as we kind of see them today, or like we could kind of think of computers in a kind of more stretched way, or like I mean it's also to do with this kind of often like very strong divide of like analog digital blah blah blah, which is in fact not like as clear, right? Um, and I think there's also a lot of potential, like then, like because then if live coding is like an engagement that involves like computation, and you have this like more open view on computation, then probably this would also open up some things. But this is yeah, it's quite hypothetical. Yeah.
Mm. Right. I started imagining live coding and baking while Martin and Yoni were talking. Yeah, like something just like, yeah, why not something completely left field?
Yeah, like live smell code.
Right. A new version of Chopped. Like oh, the chat is also very active right now, like of like just like responses to all of you right now and like more just like about like playfulness and the interfaces and whatnot. Um, it was really nice. I'm trying, we're almost about end at this our session, so I just want to check if there's any like last like questions or thoughts or anything before we move on. Um, oh, I guess one we have quick is directed at Char, but I wonder if we all can try to respond to it. Is about um, for people who aren't familiar with like IDEs or maybe live coding in general for like the rest of you is just like, how do you how do you yeah. Strange though to show fantasy IDs for people who don't know what an IDE is in the first place, wondering how you feel about that.
I guess. Okay, I'm gonna stab at it really quick. So there is this kind of collective idea of what an interface looks like. You know, even in like the greater public, whatever, people who don't know what coding entails, there's this kind of like people get like a sense of like a notion of like what technology is supposed to look like. And an example of like something that that's a canonical kind of like cringe example. I mean, it's cringe just because everyone always says it, is like of like bending that is a Minority Report where you're like working with like it's obviously like a interface and like it's readable as a future interface, which means that there is some sort of baseline interface that people can kind of go off of. So I think like there does exist some sort of like like baseline that I think is like a touchstone, and to even like with that wiggle room you can really like even if the folks don't know exactly like what like a console is, right? Or like what it's used for, you can like really play with those expectations.
Mm.
It's almost like freeing in a way.
Mm. Seems like expectations, play, mess. It's just something that just keeps coming up in this session and everyone else's. Did any of you have anything else to add or think about related? No worries, no pressure. All right. With that, then, I want to thank you all for your presentations and this like really fruitful, playful conversation. And thank you all out there for joining. Yes, there is a dog. Shout out to the dog in the chat. All
She
right.
thumbs up.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess thank you all for those of you out, this is going to conclude our first session. Our next one is about to start in the new stream around 10. Yeah, all right. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Yay. Cool.